Today's case isn't just shocking, it's inhuman. If this kind of story captivates you, even if it makes you uncomfortable, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Let's go to the end together. The mind behind the smile. In a quiet town in rural Vermont, surrounded by mountains and crisscrossed by cobblestone streets, lived a man everyone knew and admired, Daniel Morgan. At 42, he was the most sought-after dentist in Pine Hill. Tall, thin, polite, always in his impeccably white coat and with a welcoming smile on his face, he was the kind of person who immediately inspired trust. Children adored him. The elderly respected him. Women praised him. "Dr. Daniel is an angel in a white coat," they said. No one suspected what was hidden behind that constant smile and gentle gaze. He had been practicing in the same office for over 15 years, a discreet but elegant two-story building on the town's main street. He also lived there alone, on the upper floors, after the sudden death of his mother, with whom he had lived until he was 37. But little by little, strange things began to happen in Pine Hill. First, the disappearance of a young man from out of town who was passing through selling cosmetics. Then, a young nurse from the local hospital vanished without a trace. Police investigations found no suspects. There were no clues, no witnesses. The town, once serene, began to live with insecurity. But Daniel continued to smile. He welcomed patients patiently, made a point of chatting, offering coffee, asking about their families. He had a natural gift for creating empathy. Many saw him as almost a therapist. But behind the locked door of the office, there was something that no one imagined. In a hidden attic between the office and the rooms of the house, accessed only by a secret passage under one of the closets, Daniel kept a sanctuary. Photos of his victims, locks of hair, personal objects, records of every moment of fear and pain, all organized with obsessive precision. In old notebooks he wrote down dates, times, facial expressions. He was methodical. He didn't act on impulse. He chose carefully. He watched for weeks. He created a relationship. He gained trust. The disappearance of the nurse was his greatest risk. She suspected something. Days before she disappeared, she had told a friend about the strange feeling of being followed after leaving the office. But the investigation led nowhere. Daniel was irreproachable. His alibi, he was always seeing someone. That's when Emily Carter, a 29-year-old journalist who had returned to town to take care of her ailing father, came into the picture. Curious and attentive, Emily began to observe the patterns. She noticed that some of the missing people had a common connection. They had all visited Daniel's office in the weeks before their disappearance. She began to investigate on her own, without fanfare. She consulted with him. She recorded the conversation. She rummaged through the office's trash at night. She found expired sedatives, cloths with dried blood. She gave everything to a detective friend of her family. The police began to monitor discreetly. One night, Emily followed Daniel to a dirt road on the outskirts of town. He was carrying a box in the trunk. When he stopped the car and went into the woods with the box in his arms, Emily filmed everything from afar. Later, when they searched the area, they found human bones in a shallow grave. The next morning, the police surrounded the office. Daniel tried to escape through the back, but was caught. Inside the attic, they found everything, every memory, every detail of the lives he took. When questioned, he just smiled. He said calmly, "I cured them of pain. They came seeking relief, and I gave them peace." At the trial, he pleaded insanity. But the precise notes, the methodical organization, the coldness of the details convinced the jury that he knew exactly what he was doing. He was sentenced to life in prison. Emily published a book, not about him, but about the victims, with names, stories, interrupted dreams. Pine Hill was never the same again. And even today, those who pass by Daniel's old office say that sometimes at night you can see a faint light in the attic, as if he were still there, smiling in the darkness. Whispers on the wall. The first time Sarah heard the whispers was on a Monday night, shortly after midnight. She had just moved into a small ground-floor apartment in an old building in Providence, Rhode Island. The place was modest, with exposed brick walls, creaky wooden floors, and a nostalgic atmosphere that she found curiously cozy. A recent graduate in psychology, Sarah needed a fresh start, away from the traumas that had haunted her since the sudden death of her younger brother. At first, she thought the whispers were coming from the apartment next door. A male voice, low, as if murmuring something directly into the wall. The tone wasn't threatening, but there was something unsettling about that invisible presence. Sarah pressed her ear to the wall and tried to understand what was being said, but the words seemed jumbled, as if they were deliberately muffled. In the following days, the whispers returned, always at the same time. Always from the same spot on the wall between the kitchen and the living room. Sarah, skeptical, thought about old plumbing, cracks in the concrete, insomniac neighbors, but she started recording the audios. She played them back in the morning and heard nothing. Until, in one of the recordings after applying noise filters, she swore she heard her name. Sarah. She froze. The tone was subtle, almost affectionate, but the name was there, said with disturbing clarity. As the weeks passed, the whispers intensified. Now she heard loose phrases. "I saw you today. Nice red shirt. Why do you cry alone?" Sarah began to lose sleep. Her nightmares were populated by narrow corridors, eyes peering through cracks, and a presence that moved between the walls. She sought help from a friend from college, Leo, who was fascinated by paranormal phenomena. He installed more sensitive microphones on the walls, and on the first night, they captured something. But it wasn't just voices. There were metallic noises, soft scratches, as if something were crawling inside the wall. "It's not plumbing," Leo said, "and this structure doesn't have enough space for a ventilation system. It's like there's a hidden space there." Sarah convinced the building manager to allow an inspection. When they broke part of the wall, they discovered a narrow compartment between the apartments. Inside, they found empty bottles, old rags, footprints, and an old camera pointed at a crack in the wall of Sarah's apartment. The police were called. They searched the building's records and discovered that 20 years earlier, a man named Thomas Blake had lived in the apartment next door. He was shy, reclusive, considered weird by his neighbors. He was investigated for the disappearances of 2 young women in the area, but was never arrested. A fire destroyed part of the building years later, and he disappeared without a trace. Sarah delved into the research. She discovered that Thomas Blake kept a diary. Parts of it were recovered from the fire. They were detailed descriptions of his muses. He wrote about the clothes they wore, the books they read, the music they listened to through the walls, and he wrote as if they loved him. There was a phrase that was repeated: "They let me in through the cracks. They want me here." Sarah began to see shadows moving through the corners, mirrors fogged up on their own. She felt watched all the time. She began to talk to herself, or she thought she was talking to herself, until one day she found in her bookcase a book she didn't remember buying. Inside, a page torn from Thomas's diary. "Sarah, she is perfect, like Ellie, like June, like all the others." It was the last straw. Sarah left the apartment that same night. She didn't want to know anymore. She moved to the other side of the state. She never came back. 2 months later, Leo returned to the location to retrieve the recording equipment they had left behind. When reviewing the final audios, he heard something he would never forget. "She abandoned me, but you won't." The voice was not Thomas's. It was another one, new, young. Leo never recorded anything on walls again, nor did he sleep with the lights off. Sarah's apartment remains empty. Tenants come and go. None stay for very long. And the neighbors swear that sometimes at night you can hear whispers coming from the wall, always from the same wall, always saying a new name. The perfect neighbor. The neighborhood on Lavender Street in Portland, Oregon, was the kind of place that seemed straight out of a real estate brochure. Houses with well-kept gardens, quiet streets, smiling residents who greeted each other in the morning. Young families, quiet retirees, children riding bikes in the late afternoon. And among everyone there, the most beloved was the man at number 107, Michael Turner. Michael was 39 years old, single, discreet and friendly. He worked as a remote graphic designer, which allowed him to always be around. It was common to see him mowing the lawn, helping neighbors with heavy tasks, or handing out cookies he had made himself. He had a golden retriever named Max, who was as charismatic as his owner. When new residents moved in, Michael was the first to knock on the door with a welcome basket. An exemplary man. That's exactly what enchanted Rachel and Daniel Cooper, who moved into the house next door with their young daughter Ellie. Michael was a fundamental support in the first weeks. He recommended service providers, helped with the move, and occasionally took care of Ellie when the couple needed to go out. But there was something about Michael that Rachel, over time, began to feel like an excess of perfection. He never made mistakes. He never showed tiredness, anger, sadness. He was always helpful, always kind, and his smile was always present, even when there was no reason to smile. One day, Ellie told her mother that Michael took her to play in the basement of his house. Rachel thought it was strange. Michael never mentioned it. The distrust grew. Rachel, curious and worried, began to observe her neighbor's habits more closely. She noticed that he left in the early hours of the morning, almost always at random times, and returned with black bags, which he took directly to the basement. She also realized that, despite saying that he worked from home, he never talked about what he did, nor did he receive calls from clients. One night, she followed Michael discreetly. He drove to an industrial area far from the city. He parked near an abandoned warehouse and disappeared for more than an hour. When he returned, he was carrying something wrapped in tarp, which he put in the trunk. Rachel tried to tell Daniel, but he thought it was paranoia. He said that Michael was just a lonely and helpful man. But Rachel decided to investigate on her own. She waited for a day when Michael left and went to his house with any excuse. Max barked, but the door was unlocked. She went in. The house was impeccable, but sterile. Nothing personal, no family photos, no traces of friends. When she went down to the basement, she found what appeared to be a design studio, screens, cables, machines, but there was a locked door. Rachel found the key hidden under a panel. Behind the door, there was a dark room, cold, walls lined with sound insulation, cameras, photographs, dossiers, detailed reports of victims, names, habits, routines, and on one of the walls, dozens of photos of Ellie since the day of the move. In the playground, sleeping in her mother's arms, in the room. Rachel froze. She left everything as it was and left. She called the police anonymously and took Ellie to her sister's house that night. The investigation revealed much more. Michael was not Michael. His real name was Paul Hargrove. He had changed his identity 3 times in the last 10 years. He was wanted for disappearances in 3 different states. He always infiltrated small communities, gained trust, observed. And then he disappeared, along with his victims. In the basement, they also found fragments of human bones in sealed boxes, recording equipment, disturbing diaries. In one of them, he described Ellie as future perfection. The police tried to capture him, but Michael Paul had already fled. He was never found again. House 107 was sealed off. Max was taken to a shelter. Rachel and Daniel moved to another city, but the trauma followed them. And in the neighborhood of Lavender Street, no one smiles with the same confidence anymore. After all, even today, no one knows if Michael is still around, watching, waiting for the next perfect family to approach, with the same smile on his face, and the same key to the basement hidden under the panel. Soul Collector. The basement of House 221 on Ashmore Street in Savannah, Georgia, had been locked for nearly 3 decades. The Victorian house, with its arched windows and jasmine growing through the gates, seemed untouched since the 1990s. No one dared to approach after the former owners, the Whitmore couple, mysteriously disappeared in 1997. Since then, The property has passed through several owners who never lasted more than a few months. It was only in 2024 that a new family decided to restore the house. The historical restoration couple, Jonathan and Claire Myers, bought the property as part of a documentary project on abandoned houses with criminal history. What they didn't expect was what they would find hidden under the oak floor in the musty, cobweb-covered basement. Behind a bookcase nailed to the wall, Jonathan found a dark wooden box, locked with a rusty chain. When he opened it, he found a black leather diary with dry, stained pages. The first sentence written in firm letters, "This is the book of the souls that have been entrusted to me." The author of the diary identified himself only as E. Each entry reported in meticulous detail the day-to-day life of a different person. Name, age, habits, fears, routines. But at the end of each account, a cold clinical description of their death. Some by suffocation, others by drowning. Some took days, others minutes. There were no signs of guilt, regret, or anger. Only analytical observations. She only cried when she realized there would be no turning back. Before that, she tried to talk. Like everyone, Jonathan became obsessed. He read each entry as if trying to understand the mind behind the writing. Claire, on the other hand, wanted him to stop. She thought that simply keeping that diary at home was like carrying a curse, but he couldn't stop. As he read, he began to recognize patterns, dates, locations. Some of the victims described had been considered missing at the time but never found. Others were never investigated. The entry that disturbed him the most was about a young woman named Eliza. The text said, "She believed in redemption. She looked at me as if she could save me. But no one saves those who don't want to be saved." The moment her breath failed was the quietest I have ever heard. I noted the time, 02:47. In one of the diary's appendices, there were hand-drawn maps, indications of where bodies might have been buried. Jonathan gave copies to the police. Searches revealed human remains in 5 of the 7 locations indicated. But what the investigators wanted to know most was, who was E? A clue came with a torn page pasted to the bottom of the box. A name, Edward Langford, a former history professor at the local university who disappeared in 1997 around the same time as the Whitmores. His name had never been linked to the crimes. Investigations revealed that Langford had a secret relationship with the Whitmore family, and in his old house they found letters, manuscripts, and more notebooks. An entire network of notes about victims, philosophical and ritualistic observations. Edward believed that each soul taken by him was an offering, that he was accumulating essences to keep his own soul intact. He called himself the Collector. The case exploded in the media. The diaries became the subject of study. But for Claire, it was too much. She filed for divorce and abandoned the project. Jonathan, meanwhile, continued with the documentation. He created a channel, published the details, gained fame. But he also began to change. He began to talk to himself, to write notebooks, to write down names. 2 years later, Jonathan disappeared. He left a letter written in the same handwriting as the original diary. The collection must continue. I can't leave them empty. They watch me when I close my eyes. I need to give them something new. House 221 remains sealed off, but sometimes at night, some say they hear footsteps in the basement and whispers, calling for names that are still alive. Dr. Sullivan's last patient. Dr. Leonard Sullivan's office was in a dark brick house on the outskirts of Chicago. Unlike modern clinics with gleaming receptions and bright walls, Dr. Sullivan's office was like a relic of the past. Worn leather armchairs, bookshelves crammed with old books, and an unsettling silence that filled every corner. He was known for taking patients in extreme cases, those who had already been through several professionals without improvement. When everyone gives up, Dr. Sullivan accepts, they said. He wasn't an ordinary psychiatrist. He didn't believe in drug treatments or traditional routines. His therapy was conversational, based on confronting fear. and his deep, deliberate voice made patients reveal what they had never told anyone. It was on a rainy November night that he received his last patient. Her name was Evelyn Carter, 27 years old, pale, with deep dark circles under her eyes and a fixed gaze, as if she were trapped by something unseen. She wouldn't sit down without first looking under the chair. She wouldn't turn her back on open doors. The record delivered by her mother described episodes of dissociation, severe insomnia, and auditory delusions since the age of 18, after the suicide of her older sister. In the first session, Evelyn barely spoke. She kept observing the office. She touched the books. She asked about the carpet. She wanted to know how many people had been there. When she finally spoke, she only said, "What I have isn't a disorder. It's a plague." Dr. Sullivan noted that with interest. In the following sessions, Evelyn opened up little by little. She said that since her sister's death, she had been hearing a voice, not in her head, but in the environment. The voice knew things that no one knew. She woke up with marks on her body, even locked in her room. The mirrors fogged up when she approached, and there was always a smell of burning metal before something bad happened. "I've tried to kill myself 3 times, Dr. Sullivan. Not to die, but to see if this thing would leave me. It won't." The doctor, skeptical, believed in deep traumas as triggers for psychotic disorders. But Evelyn was different. There were no outbursts or common perceptual distortions. Her lucidity was astounding, and she wasn't seeking help. She seemed to be warning. In the 6th session, something happened. Dr. Sullivan, after a particularly tense session, decided to listen to the recordings, something he only did for professional safety. When listening, he noticed something disturbing. In sections where Evelyn was silent, a second voice whispered, "He is listening." He thought it was interference. He repeated the audio with headphones. The voice wasn't Evelyn's. It was hoarse, low, and seemed to be addressing Dr. Sullivan himself. He tried to ignore it. But in the following days, the mirrors in his house cracked on their own. Lights flickered. He began to dream of a figure standing in the corner of the office, where Evelyn always avoided looking. In the 8th session, Evelyn stared at him for minutes in silence. Then she said, "It liked you." Dr. Sullivan tried to interrupt the session, but she held his hand. "Now you understand." The next morning, Evelyn was found dead in her apartment. Apparently she was sleeping. There were no signs of violence, drugs, or organ failure. But her face was frozen in a wide, forced, almost unnatural smile. The office recorder was seized for analysis. The recording of the last session, however, was never found. Dr. Sullivan disappeared 2 days later. His belongings were intact. Car in the garage, lights on, office locked from the inside. But he simply vanished. A few weeks later, an old patient received a letter dated after the disappearance. The handwriting was Sullivan's. "Some presences don't want to be cured. They want to be understood. And when they are, they stay with you." The office remains closed. Those who pass by say that at night, the lamp in the corner of the office turns on by itself, and that, if you put your ear to the door, you can hear 2 voices. One female, serene, and one male, grave, whispering back.